welcome back to Visiting Alice, and it is my quarter annual book review video. This is everything I read over the last winter, 24-25. If you don't know, I do this every spring, summer, autumn, winter, so check out my other videos for sure. I've got a whole playlist and everything. But today, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I don't have as many books as normal. I don't remember how many I have, but it's normally, 15, 20. Today I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So like half the amount I sometimes have. I don't know what happened. I didn't think I was in a reading slump. I thought I was reading normal, but I guess I was reading really slow. So I've just got way less books. And you think over Christmas I would read way more, but apparently not. So maybe a bit of a shorter video today, but that's alright. It's what I read. It's realistic. I'm not going to make it up. Doesn't help though. I'm currently reading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which if you don't know, this big. And I always read 3 books at a time. So it means that one of those books has always been taken up by one that I'm just not going to finish for a really long time. I'm not even sure it's going to show up in my spring what I read. It might end up being summer. Who knows? So that's obviously slowed me down a lot. But anyway, excuses. Let's talk about these books. So normally I start with rereads. I haven't done a single reread this season, so let's move swiftly on to the books that I don't have a copy of. The first one, and the only one, is Tess of the D'Urbervilles. I do have a copy. I just don't know where it's gone. It's somewhere in the house, and I don't really misplace things. I've normally got quite good organization, so Lord knows, I don't know where it's gone. Anyway, Tess of the D'Urbervilles. My granny recommended it. I had it all looking so nice, and then an advert comes on. Ignore that. So my granny gave me the book and said that I should read it, and I was interested because, as you know, I've been reading classics, but it was quite long and the words were very small, so it took me a while, but I was like, oh, you know what, I'll get into it, let's do it. So I started reading it, and you know what, I actually really enjoyed it. It was a really good book. I was pleasantly surprised. Obviously, I tend to only compare classics to classics rather than classics to one of the modern books I've read. But I think comparing to some of the others I've read, it was probably one of my favourites. It was really good. As with all these books, too long. Honestly, you could have cut it in half and the exact same outcome would have happened. The characters were really interesting and kind of weird. I don't know, this is one of those ones I read way back. It's sort of November time, so I don't really remember too much of it, but I know I really enjoyed it. I had a really good time reading it, and it was a fairly easy and accessible classic to read. So I recommend reading it if you're maybe looking at getting into reading some more oldies but goldies. It's probably a good one to start with, although it is quite long, but it is a fairly accessible book. The paintings are back. Yay. I am actually sweating. It's so hot, but I don't really want to get changed properly, so I put a fleece on over my pajamas. And also, sorry if you can hear it, but there's a risk to life red warning storm going on outside, so sorry if you can hear the wind. Okay, so now let's go through the list, the pile even, in no particular order, just as I grab them. So I read The Winter Spirits, Ghostly Tales for Frosty Nights, and this is actually a compilation book, so there's not one particular author. In fact, there's a lot of authors. I read the other one of this series called The Haunting Season. They're both spooky winter tales. That's essentially what they are. I have to say, so you might remember the first one, The Haunting Season, I thought was fine. There was 2 stories in it that I thought was kind of worth my time reading. They were good, they were spooky. This one, I think none of them were any good. That's not true. There was one about a vicar. Let me see if I can remember. I think it might be The Salt Miracles. That one... Oh, was it though? I think so. About a vicar that goes to an old Scottish island. That one was okay. But generally speaking, there wasn't a single one of these stories where after I read it, I was like, oh, so good. I'm going to have to look up more of what this author writes. Nothing like that. This one was a little disappointing. They weren't spooky. Most of them were barely set in winter. You can tell they maybe had the story already lying around and just rejigged it a little so it would fit the theme, but it could have been set at any time, whereas I was looking for hauntings in the snow and I don't know, I'm thinking of Doctor Who, a Christmas tree that comes to life or something like that. No, they could have been set at any time. It legitimately wouldn't have mattered. So this one was a bit disappointing. I did get all the way through because obviously you want to give every story a chance. Just because it's here doesn't mean that you shouldn't read it any more than if it was at the beginning. So I did read the whole thing, but I kind of wish I hadn't. I'm sorry. It's a pretty book. It would actually, even though it's not good, it would make a really good gift because it like looks nice. But yeah, I wouldn't bother picking it up. I do really like the idea of like cozy winter stories, like spooky cozy, like Victorian kind of vibe. Does that make any sense? But this one just wasn't it. Not for me. They're probably going to bring out another one this year because that's what they've been doing, and I'll probably read it even though I don't like them. Okay, next is Ghosts of the Tsunami by Richard Lloyd Parry. This is a book about a man who's British, I believe, but lives in Japan and can speak fluent Japanese, and he lived there when there was the earthquake that led to the whole Hiroshima disaster. It was an earthquake, a nuclear disaster, and a tsunami all at the same time. And I believe it was one of the worst, if not the worst earthquake that's ever happened. Could be wrong there, but it was definitely one of the worst. So it was a pretty big deal for him to live through it. But obviously he was in Tokyo, he was, you know, as things go, totally fine. But he was really, really interested to find out more afterwards about the, you know, the people who weren't fine, the people who were really affected. So he went to this particular town that was hit by the earthquake, but was probably like the worst hit by the tsunami. Like it was not good. Just a small sort of rural town on the coast. So he goes there obviously because he can speak Japanese. He interviews all these people, finds out, you know, their stories, their experiences, what happened, what the aftermath was, them trying to fight for justice because things weren't handled well. So that's essentially what this book is about. And to start with, it was really good. The story of what this town went through is something else. It's awful, truly awful. I don't think there was a single person that wasn't like deeply negatively affected by some outcome of this natural disaster that happened. It's truly awful. That being said, I think you could summarize all that in about that many pages, and it's that many pages. There are so many chapters that are almost complete repeats of what was said in other chapters. I don't know if he meant for this book to be flipped through, but I don't think so, because it tells a narrative tale, but there was some chapters I was like, I've read this already, like there was nothing new. So I think it was really trying to stretch itself into sort of sellable book size, which is a shame because that did kind of bring it down a little bit. On top of that, he does say in the book that he's not going to focus on Hiroshima and the nuclear aspect of it because that didn't affect this town so much, which is fair enough, but I just don't think it was mentioned enough. That's still a huge part of what happened. It maybe impacts why the emergency relief wasn't as good as it should be because they were focused on that, and there's not really any mention of it. And I think it's such a huge part of this natural disaster that it was just a shame that that was so completely omitted from the story. I mean, it's well written, it's a very interesting story, but I personally think you could get a similar experience from looking at maybe documentaries, reading news articles, that kind of thing, rather than reading the same thing kind of said over and over again, is my thought. I hate giving negative reviews, but actually I think most of these books that I read recently are going to get negative reviews. Maybe that's why I didn't read so many. I was just slowed down by books I didn't like. Okay, the next book is Daydream by Hannah Grace. This is the third in her series. I don't know what she's calling the series. It probably has a name, but essentially it's about this group of friends, and each book focuses on a different friend and their kind of romance experience. So it's like a light-hearted romance sort of book. That's what they all are. They're nothing too deep, too crazy. So this one is about Henry, who's one of the group. So it's his turn for a book, and he meets Hallie, who's like a bit of a bookworm, a little bit nerdy, works in the library, whereas he's sort of more sporty, so it's got that kind of vibe to it. And it's good fun. He plays ice hockey, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's good fun. It's a good book. I really enjoyed reading it. I think Hannah Grace is a really good writer in this kind of genre, whatever you would call this genre. It's not teen, young adult romance, I don't know, I guess. So yeah, I really enjoyed reading it, but I feel like I never have as much to say about these books because they're just so light-hearted. It's like, yeah, I recommend it. It's good. Read it at the beach. Why not? It's more like a spring-summer kind of book, but still, this is when it came out. I will say out of the three, it's probably my second favourite. My favourite is 100% Icebreaker, the first one. That's one of my favourite books of all time. I'm definitely going to reread that soon. I love it. And then this would be my second favourite, and then my third favourite would be Wildfire, which I still liked but just not as much. The characters didn't like resonate with me as much as they did in this one, an Icebreaker. So yeah, definitely recommend if you've read the other two in the series and you're wondering if you should read this one. Definitely yes, it was very good. So you'll be disappointed to hear that I have continued with my Alison Weir 6 Tudor Queen series. I say disappointed because I talk about them in every single book review video that I've done, but this one was Catherine of Aragon. I was a bit nervous because it's the biggest. You can see where the sun hits the book. It's the biggest because obviously she had a lot going on before and after Henry, so a lot to say, but I was really excited about this one because Catherine of Aragon's always been my favourite queen, although I have to say maybe Jane Seymour after reading these books is up there, but she's got such an interesting story, she's such a powerful woman, and this book does a really good job of telling that story and kind of personifying her in a way that I would say is accurate. I'm not a historian, but based on having a love for Tudor history, I would say it was pretty good. She has such a tragic story. She was destined to be a queen her whole life and ends her life basically kidnapped in exile, with nothing, and it's really, really sad. And again, Alison Weir does a really good job at kind of putting all that together in a way that really makes you sympathise with her and sympathise with Henry enough. I always say I think she does a good job of showing how horrible Henry VIII was, but without making you totally like go off him, because you can't, because he is then, you read this one, there's 5 more books to go with this guy and you have to root for all the different romances that he has, so she has to kind of toe the line. I think she does quite a good job there. And speaking of, I also read the Anna of Cleves one, Queen of Secrets. This one, I knew the least about Anne of Cleves by quite a long shot compared to all the other queens, so I was going in a little bit trepidatiously because I wasn't sure if I was gonna like her story or not, but it was really interesting. She's a way more interesting person than I thought she would be, with a lot more backstory and a lot more things going on, but generally speaking I would still say this was maybe the least interesting one I've read so far. I'm trying to think, but I think it might have been. And that's just because she doesn't have a huge amount of hardship. She marries the king. Does it really go too well? They both say, yeah, let's divorce. Not really for us. And then she lives out the rest of her life as a queen, basically. Obviously, there's more up and downs than that, but generally speaking, it's not too bad. So sometimes it does feel like it drags a little bit, just because I feel like, you're trying to fill a big book with not a lot of information, but that said, it was still good, but probably my least favourite of the series so far, because I still have Catherine Parr and Anne Boleyn to read, so maybe they'll come up next time, we'll see. I also read, as my sort of classic for the season, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Other Tales of Horror by Robert Louis Stevenson. Know a lot about Stevenson because he's Scottish, so we learned a lot about him in school. I don't really need to say Jekyll and Hyde, I mean, it's a pretty well-known story. What I loved about this book was how short it was, and this is multiple stories as well. Jekyll and Hyde is the longest story in the set that he wrote in this book, but it's still pretty short, so it gets total bonus points for that, and I actually think it does a really good job of fitting the story, and like, he didn't like loads of these books that I'm talking about, he didn't overwrite to try and fill a big book. Like, he just, when the story was ended, he was like, I'm done, it's a short story, sure. So I think it really benefits from that because it just works at such a good pace. And on top of that, it's scary, it's good, and I so wish I didn't know the twist. I mean, obviously everyone knows the twist, that it's the same person, Jekyll and Hyde. I would have been gagged reading this whenever it came out. I don't know if it says 1886, no, that's the picture, but around that time. Oh my god, could you imagine finding out that they were the same person? You'd be talking to everyone about it. Oh, I so wish I could do that, because it really does gag you even though you know it. It's like, I need to read it again to like see all the little hints and things like that. It's a brilliant book. There's a couple of other stories he wrote that are also kind of spooky short stories. They weren't as interesting. I'm not really going to talk about them much. You can tell why Jekyll and Hyde was sort of the standout story from that collection. The other ones were fine, but Jekyll and Hyde is the winner. So one of the standout books I read is The Only Plane in the Sky by Garrett M. Graff, The Oral History of 9/11. I'm autistic, if you didn't know, and are just walking into this video, I have some pretty intense hyperfixations. For a long time it's been 9/11. I think I know pretty much everything there is to know about this tragedy, unfortunately. So I was like, I've not actually read any books on 9/11, so I was like, I'll give it a go. I mean, the books, like I say, I kind of know everything, so the books don't really give me anything new, but it's a nice new perspective on the book. So this one is exclusively on the event, sorry. This book is exclusively interviews with people, so there's not really like an actual author telling the story, and when I say interviews, they were interviews, but everyone only ever gets like at most a paragraph, different person, so it's not like one person gets like a whole chapter. It's very, very short snippets, so it'll focus on different aspects and everyone gets like a sentence or two, and by reading all those quotes put together you kind of get the whole picture. I think it's brilliant. I love oral histories. I've read one about Chernobyl as well. I just think they're absolutely the perfect way to learn about something, and I just thought this book was amazing. I think it's maybe the best non-fiction book I've ever read. I read it and then bought the audiobook because they've got a cast of like 60 actors that like goes through the whole thing, and it includes like actual recordings from the event and stuff. It also includes like pictures and things like that in it as well. I just think it's a really, really good book. It's just really well done. So if you're interested in sort of learning more about this event, I definitely would recommend this book. It's got, I think it covers almost every detail. It's obviously a very hard book to read, but it is really good. So I would definitely say, yeah, one of the best history books I've ever read, which is pretty high praise from me. The next book is good old John. So I have been reading these Penguin Monarch books. I say reading these, I've read one other, which was Henry the Fourth, I think. I don't know, it was definitely Henry. So this one's about John the First and only. There was only one King John, and he was 1199, so we're going way back. I kind of focus more on War of the Roses, Tudor, Stuart, Elizabethan kind of era, so this is way back for me. So this was all completely new. It was very well written. Again, gives you lots of information. You will learn about King John, and I learned lots of things I obviously didn't know. That being said, and this is just a personal thing, I found this really boring because I'm just not interested in this part of history. But I'm keen to read the whole lot. I want to read about all the kings and queens, so I'm going to read through them all, and there are just going to be some that just aren't as interesting, but it goes a lot in like how money worked in the 1100s and the 1200s and specific battles. And I mean, that's what I expected. I'm not complaining that I was missold. I knew that's what it was going to be going into it, but it's just not the kind of history that I'm interested in reading. He's an interesting guy, obviously led to the Magna Carta and things like that, really important in British history, but yeah, not so much my cup of tea in terms of history, but I'm glad I read it. I'm going to keep reading them. I'm going to read them in random orders because I think it will get a bit boring if you're sort of stuck here for a long time and then stuck here. I'm just going to flip around the place. So there will be one or two more in my spring what I read for sure, because I've already bought another one. So we're slowly getting there. If there's a particular one you want me to read, let me know. Moving on, we have Good Girl Bad Blood by Holly Jackson. She wrote A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, which I loved. Watched the TV show since I read that. I think it was very miscast. I think, I can't remember her name, but the woman from Wednesday who's Pippa in it, I think she's great. She was not right for this role, and I just don't think it was right, and I don't think it was done as well as it could have been. A side note, but I was excited to read this. This is the sequel, a direct sequel as well. I wasn't sure if she was going to do a different story. What I really like, as I liked about the first one, is the multimedia aspect of it. Emails, phone calls, transcripts, podcast episodes, newspaper clippings to kind of tell the story and tell the mystery. And I love a good murder mystery, or in this case, someone disappearing mystery. I really enjoyed it in terms of that, and I liked trying to figure out what was happening, and of course, as always, I didn't figure it out. I'm rubbish at these things. That being said, not as good as the first one. Just generally, the first one's definitely still the best. This is a really good book. If I read it on its own, I'd probably really be praising it more, but compared to the first one, I thought this was actually quite a big step down, and I feel like it lacked a purpose. To me, it's like a je ne sais quoi, but it felt like she was writing it and figuring out what the plot was going to be like as she went along, whereas in the first one it felt like she knew the end destination she was getting to. And I could be totally wrong, but that's just the vibe I got. It just felt a little bit more lost than the first one. Am I making any sense? I don't know. Okay, the last book I read is The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. I also watched the miniseries on this, which was on Sky, I think. That was really good. Lots of differences, but it was really good. But anyway, back to books. Tattooist of Auschwitz is obviously very, very famous. I'm only just getting around to reading it, and I loved it. I saved this one deliberately for last because I wanted to do a positive last, but it's really, really, really good. How many times am I going to say good? It's about a man. It's a true story. So the author, Heather Morris, went and interviewed this guy, but then kind of fictionalized it a little bit. He ends up in Auschwitz, the concentration camp, and ends up being the tattooer. So he tattoos the famous numbers on the prisoners' arms, which is kind of, iconic's not the right word, but kind of known as like a symbol of someone who went through that. So he obviously has to kind of deal with the guilt of that and feeling like he's working for the Nazi regime, but also knowing that he's just doing what he has to do to survive, and people don't really blame him for that. And then he kind of falls in love with a woman in one of the other camps. I think she might have been in Birkenau, Gita. And again, they kind of talk about that romance that happens as well, and trying to find hope in this horrible situation. And to give you a summary, at the end they both survive and they both get married and live their life together, so that was nice, out of it. But it's a really, really powerful story, such a unique story. I mean, how many other people are going to have a life story like that? And I just thought it was a very hard book to read, obviously, but a really important one. If someone can go through all that in their lives and come out the other side, then I can get through reading about it. Do you know what I mean? But I can't recommend it enough. It's very well written, very easy to read, nothing too complicated. It's not that long. You could probably read it in a day if you really powered through it, because the writing's quite big and things like that. But I think it's brilliant. And there's one particular Nazi officer as well who he gets close to. He knows him and sees him and talks to him more than the other officers, and he's kind of an antagonist, but also in the TV show they kind of give him a bit more of a backstory in terms of starting to feel guilty about what he's doing. Doesn't do that in the book because I don't think that would have happened in real life, but it's kind of interesting to get that sort of perspective of things as well. Lots and lots of interesting characters in there, so I cannot recommend reading this book enough. I think everyone should have to read it. It's really, really, really good. That's all the books, guys. That's all I read. Normally this video will be twice as long, twice as many books. I apologize. I will do better for spring. I just don't know what happened. But I'm still really into reading. I'm really excited to be reading. I've got lots of books. I got so many books for Christmas, guys. Like, you have no idea. I'm so excited to read them all. I do not need to buy a new book for a long time. So that being said, if you've got any recommendations, anything you think would be really good to read, you think it would kind of fit with the vibe of the books I like, please let me know. I'm always happy to be recommended. I've also been considering starting a little book club or something on here. I'm not quite sure how it would work yet, but let me know if you're interested, where we all get the same book, go away and read it, come back and have discussions. I don't know, it's a possibility. We'll see. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I do lots more book videos, but I also do lots of other videos as well, so please check them out, and I'll see you soon. Bye.